you've read IBM and the Holocaust? You read
I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with the relationship there.
He's a good dear friend of mine, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing now. Giant corporations are in bed with all of this stuff, and someday they'll be hiding it and go, no, we didn't do anything with that. But I don't know if
I don't think they even have to now. I mean, if it really gets to the transhumanist point and they can just manipulate, this is an attempt to manipulate consciousness.
Yes.
Really. So, and memory and all of that. I mean, they don't have to even bother with it anymore once it gets to that point.
I talked to Ray Kurzweil once, and I said, you put the nanotechnology, just help me out here, Ray. I'm a science fiction writer. You put the nanotechnology into me, and you control it. Not me. You control it. And I start speaking out about things that you and the powerful don't like. Why don't you just turn me off? Why don't you just, you know what? And all that nanotechnology, and I just die.
Sure.
And his response was, because we wouldn't do that.
Yeah, let's trust us.
Yeah.
How has that gone for the, past 100 years or so? Right. And if organized crime are the people in charge, are you going to trust them? I mean, they want us to trust them. If you look at the World Economic Forum or even the Biden administration and a lot of their policy documents, one of their main focuses are rebuilding trust with the public. And it's not working.
Yeah, it's not.
But they may be looking at drastic interventions to make it work. And I think, if we're transhumanism to be shoehorned through, that could happen. And if you're seeing this, this sort of these mergers, because there's many of them, of Silicon Valley companies and big pharma, they're framing it as healthcare, but it's eugenics being framed as healthcare. And it's really
terrifying.
I mean, it's terrifying. It's crazy. There's a lot of words for it, but ultimately it has to be stopped. And unfortunately, COVID has set this precedent where it can be mandatory, or where you can lose your livelihood, where you can not be able to travel. You can basically be placed under house arrest unless you agree to it.
If you don't, in the grand scheme of where we've all been upgraded, we're all part of the internet.
Upgraded.
Yeah, I know.
I don't think that's the intention. That's how they're selling it to people. If you look at this, for example, the British Eugenics Society, where a lot of this came from, you look at someone like H.G. Wells, best known as a science fiction writer, but also a avowed eugenicist. He predicted that in 100 to 200 years, there would be two human races. There would be the upgraded, augmented elite who were intellectual and attractive and, were the ones that did everything. And then a dwarf-like, troll-like, squat underclass that eats bugs. And, for people that have been paying attention, it seems like, they're selling this as one way. It's all going to be a utopian thing if we all upgrade. I mean, that's how it's being framed, right? But if you look at how these people think, they don't want that. They're looking at feudalism and how do you create a class of slaves that cannot even cognitively rebel ever again.
It is why, these teachers' unions said, we care about, minorities and everything else. They did more damage to a whole generation of minorities more than they did white kids.
But they
put kids in general into the gears of the machine.
I live in South America. The lockdowns there were brutal. Everyone was under house arrest, basically. You were only allowed out of your house twice a week with papers that you had to show to police. Each paper was good for roughly 3 hours. And my daughter goes to daycare. She's 4, and she was thankfully, shielded from a lot of this and was able to have interaction and stuff. But a lot of kids weren't. And a lot of kids her age and younger are nonverbal. They scream, instead of talking. Mm-hmm. It's devastating. And the fact that these people, act like it was for the children or for public health when, the evidence increasingly comes out and it wasn't, it was for something else. And I think it's increasingly becoming clear what that something else is and was.
What we're doing to farming, the ESG and World Economic Forum plan is evil. I mean, it seems an overused word, and it's one I swore off about 5 years ago. I said, I don't want to call things evil because it has to be evil is a different level. But when you're talking about controlling and dumbing down and enslaving and destroying, I don't know what other word to use for it. And they've gotten away with saying this is conspiracy theory.
Well, they just, I think that's, since the term really entered the American vernacular after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, it's been used to basically claim that if you think powerful people get together to discuss how to advance their power and keep it at the expense of everyone else, that they have any agency, you're crazy. It all has to be a coincidence. They never have any bad intentions. The people that, are the oligarchs that, fund our politicians and have ties with intelligence and have monopolies and, the technology that runs our lives and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, it's, I think at this point you have to be quite naive to think that's actually the case, but.
So how do people like the new governor, I think, of Alberta, is standing up against ESG. And one of the first things she said was, anybody that brags about how they have controls and people in every government leader's office, if not the leader themselves, I don't think we should be doing any business with them. And ESG and World Economic Forum is out. How does somebody like that survive somebody like Klaus Schwab?
I think, it's not just Klaus Schwab. I think Klaus Schwab is sort of a man who is there to facilitate. I mean, let's talk about the World Economic Forum for a second and what it is and what it's not. They describe themselves as the premier promoter of public-private partnerships. For lack of a better word, that is fascism. So, then you have the family history of Klaus Schwab, that his father ran a Nazi model company and funded the atomic bomb and all of that, and just very complicated stuff there. And you basically have him being in this position where he's promoting, fascism on a global
I mean, he's
a
white kitty cat away from being a James Bond supervillain.
Well, but I think that's, they want everyone to focus on him and think that it's just him and just the World Economic Forum. There's other organizations that are promoting this too. And also a lot of the, the Young Global Leader program, that's not exclusive to the World Economic Forum. There's lots of other institutions with similar agendas, that sort of are related to the World Economic Forum, which seeks, not just public-private partnerships and fascism, but global governance. There's a lot of these organizations seating their people in certain places. So how do you, fight against this? I think there are sort of like factional infighting to an extent. And it's really hard to know how that's going at any given time. But there's an obvious effort by powerful interests to stop nationalist politicians from reaching the highest levels.
You think?
And, I think it's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do they stop that? I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, you look at the World Economic Forum, a lot of the banks are very involved. And when you are in bed with the banks and the banks are in bed with you,
you're fine.
It's very hard to go against that in today's world. And, they're making it even harder on the little people in Canada that protested with the trucker protest. They were deplatformed, not from social media, but from the financial system. And I think that's going to become increasingly common. It's already happening to a lot of people that I work with, taken off of PayPal, having trouble with their banks, Venmo. I mean,
Sure.
And I think that's going to, become increasingly commonplace, and that's how they're going to try and force compliance. And, a big part of this, you have the move towards a central bank digital currency and all of that at the same time, which is programmable money. The state decides whether you save or you spend. They decide what you can and can't buy and all this stuff. And all the central banks, even on the, in places like Russia, where Vladimir Putin talks a good game about nationalism and protecting our culture, they're going full steam ahead with that too.
It's the way you control a population.
Yeah. And I think all these governments are really interested right now in domestic control.